there are 3 questions in the chat box. One is directed to Siviwe, and the other, I see that Arjan has said that he would like to answer the question. So I don't see any hands that have been raised, so we will focus on addressing the 3 questions. The question to Siviwe says, Siviwe, it's from Nomtandazo Mlambo. It says, Siviwe mentioned the importance of intersectional paralysis in dissemination of research and or knowledge brokering. Could you say a little bit more about this and share practical examples of what intersectional research dissemination looks like? Thank you.
Thanks, Melody, and thanks to all of our speakers so far. It's been quite an interesting discussion. But very quickly, in the interest of time, thank you, Tando, for your question, and I'm very happy to engage with you after the session. I was very happy and honored to collaborate actually on the WIGO case study. But I do believe that all of the case studies provided some examples of what this might look like. But I'm speaking from kind of my experience working on the kind of WIGO actionable research approach. I think the key thing, and I thought about this actually when Alejandra was talking about kind of outputs and how well they might be, organizations might feel that they're doing in terms of the kinds of outputs that are required. I think a lot of the issues around intersectionality, and I think when it comes to organizations on the ground, when it comes to organizations in the Global South, is what those outputs might look like. And I think they might be somewhat of a kind of a disjuncture between what funding organizations might regard as important outputs and what the organizations that are dealing with the various social issues in their context might understand those to be. And the WIGO case study suggests a few examples of what intersectional dissemination might look like, but I think at its core, it's about co-producing the content for targeted audiences. So what is it that we're able to produce in terms of our dissemination that might be useful for addressing those social issues that organizations are dealing with? And also making sure that kind of, in co-producing that, the dissemination of analyses that organizations are conducting happens rapidly and is able to be used by organizations in their own advocacy work for social change. And so the other thing was also around kind of translating knowledge around in ways that can be used. So either in kind of fact sheets or in any documents that help to support whatever ongoing struggles are taking place in the countries that we're working with, but also involving kind of local actors in these discussions as well, that we might be having to understand those social issues and what is actually required to address them. But happy to engage with you after as well, but do have a look at the case studies which were shared in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Siviwe. We have another question from Nomtandazo. It's mainly, I think it's a combination of a comment and some questions that she also presented. She says, intersectionality is not just about documenting inequality, but also about how systems of oppression intersect to perpetuate vulnerability. So it is about acting for social change. But these are structural things. Could you say more about what exactly intersectional grant making looks like practically in terms of grant making that supports partners to engage structural change beyond documenting inequalities? Are we, the second question that she has is, are we talking about multi-year funding, flexible funding, funding for local actors, how funders set their calls for proposals, and how funders evaluate proposals? Just trying to understand just trying to understand practical takeaways from in terms of supporting structural change. I don't know if you want to take that question, Siviwe, or
I'm happy to, but also I'd actually like to hear from Fazana if she did make some recommendations at the end of her presentation, but happy for her to expand on that.
Okay, Fazana, are you able to take the question? Do you?
Yeah, so I think, well, the way we approached the question of did we do intersectional research was to talk about the fact that, you know, intersectionality needs to be sort of a baseline, right, from which one does one's work. So I think for us, the learning from that, in terms of, you know, how I concluded, was also that, you know, we needed more time. We needed, you know, the ability to sort of take the next step with regards to what we found and sort of the connections that we made and sort of the realizations that we came to, right? And I don't necessarily see us, you know, being part of an infrastructure that allows for that, right? I mean, what kinds of, can the next steps be built into, like the funding process, for instance, right? I mean, we did this work during COVID, right? So we, you know, it was really compromised in terms of what we could do and how we could finish, and, you know, I mean, we weren't able to sort of perform at our best because of those circumstances as well, right? And we had sort of, you know, the grant didn't end on the day that it was supposed to. We had an extension and all of that, but still, I mean, it was inadequate for us to sort of take it forward in any substantial way. So I think it is important, if we are sort of committing to, you know, and not just in terms of intersectional grant making, but in terms of giving some space for researchers in the global south to develop our own understanding of what it is that we need to do with this material, right? How we need to take it forward, that we need some flexibility, we need sort of the possibility of accessing money for the long durée, we need some, you know, access to maybe other places in which we could talk about these things. We need a different kind of support infrastructure.
Okay.
Quickly add Melody to that. Flexible, multi-year kind of funding. If the focus of intersectionality is about social change, we know that the social change doesn't happen overnight. And that continuity in the project and in the people that are conducting and doing this work needs to be integrated in the kind of funding practices as well, to allow for the kind of work that Fazana was also speaking about.
Okay. We have an additional comment in the chat box from Genevieve. She says, this leads me to think that grant makers and grantees should engage not on the basis of specific objectives and outputs to be delivered in the course of a 3-year project, but rather engage in a common long-term journey where deliverables and timelines, objectives will be built during the process. Quite a shift. That's what she has to say. But I know that there is another question from Genevieve, and Ajahn had said that he would like to answer that. So the question goes, what are some of the concrete examples of grant characteristics that could make grant more intersectional friendly? What, from a grantee's perspective, can make intersectionality easier to implement? And if we take a step back, how can granting initiative be designed from the start? What principles should we think about? Ajahn, I saw that you wanted to answer that question.
Thanks, Melody. Thanks, Edward. I didn't actually mean to say I wanted to answer the question. I was copying some of the text and ticked the wrong box. And I don't have. I don't have an answer to the question. I think one of Genevieve, I think, partly answered her own question, so to the latter part of that, right? And I'm really happy. What I do want to say is I'm really happy, one, that those questions are coming up. As that, like, this is really, and really this is a conversation between the people who call the grantees, but the people doing the research and that fund that, right? And I heard a lot of very good recommendations about how grant processes should not be designed. I think that's actually the easy part. How they should be designed is actually a little harder. And there's one more reason why I think there's a conversation between the funders and the people doing the research, because there are very good examples of intersectional research. If you see that in the case studies, and some of those research projects were part of cohorts of research projects that all had the same funding conditions, and some did very well in intersectionality. And I always thought like this was, the impact of COVID was such a deep intersectional question. I mean, some research projects did very well and some did not, and the funding conditions were the same, right? And so what I think, there's actually a lot of good lessons in that. One, there are the good recommendations, and the funders be aware of, I think the point about if you're looking for change in deep inequalities, that's not going to happen overnight. You need to support movements. Of course, that's not happening overnight. Yet funders will always be constrained. Yet there are research organizations in the global south that under the same conditions do that very well. So there's very important lessons in there. And again, that is not an answer to the question, but I think that the comments that are made, the warnings for donors, as well as the experience of how that can be done, and that collaboration between donors and the researchers doing this work is so important. And this conversation is just wonderful for me, very much a beginning where we see those directions, and hope we'll continue that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you to Sivia and Fazana as well for answering the other question and having a go at it. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of this session. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it's not the last session, so you will be able to join another session. We have another session, a third and final session that's coming up. So hopefully you will get more time to engage with this topic of intersectionality. You'll be hearing from us and from the SCIS team. We would just like to say to the panelists and to everybody who joined us in this conversation, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.